What's going on, brother? What's going on, brothers and sisters? It's Brother Tezwan. I wanted to come out tonight and do a new video, a message that I've been wrestling with for quite some time. It's going to come out of Matthew chapter 19, verse 1 through 12. And so the reason why I've been struggling with this message is because this is probably, if not the most controversial question that believers and teachers of Jesus deal with of this time. And that question is, what did Jesus say about homosexuality? And in my experience, more often than not, the answer to the question is Jesus did not say anything. More often than not, when believers or teachers is teaching scripture about homosexuality, normally they refer to either Paul or the Old Testament. And obviously, Brother Tezwan follows Jesus. So I'm looking to Jesus for the answer. And so, again, in my study, I was given this scripture some months ago. It was in part. It wasn't in whole. I don't think I was ready quite to receive everything God was trying to show me in terms of how to have this conversation and how to answer this question. So initially the question was answered for me in verse 12 in the context of Jesus talking about eunuchs. But on this morning, I had a revelation, if you will, and the Most High began to show me it was bigger than just verse 12. He instructed me to go back into the text and look at the entire encounter itself. And so it's in this encounter, starting at verse 1 of chapter 19 in Matthew, and goes through verse 12. And it's here that I'm going to attempt to answer the question in the best way I think I possibly can, in terms of what did Jesus say about homosexuality. Hopefully this doesn't require two videos, but if it does, God provides. So I'm not going to read the scripture itself. I may, just the parts that I feel like are highlights and important for you to get. But in chapter 19, verse 1 through let's just say through 4, we see Jesus leaving Galilee, the more liberal and open environment, going into Judea, the more religious and conservative environment. And he's approached by a group of Pharisees, the men in power, the Jewish elite, who are approaching him specifically, according to the scripture, to test him. And the question they ask is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? I'm reading out of the NIV, so if your scripture says something different, that's why. So again, the question that the Pharisees are asking Jesus is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Now, be very clear. This is a trap question. And if you understand the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes in the environment, you understand that this is not a typical question. The reason why it's not typical is because it's a very broad question. It's not specific enough, right? And so it's here where, when I began to look at this encounter this morning, I was like, whoa, why ask the question like that? So if you can just imagine, allow yourself to open your mind a little, and imagine observing a group of powerful, famous, well-known men who pretty much everybody expects and looks up to, right? You can imagine these are the type of men that may have power and access to things that other people would normally have. All right. So hold that image in your mind as we continue to have this discussion. When I was having this conversation with my wife this morning, the character that I presented to her, because it's an easy character to identify if you're familiar with the show Game of Thrones, is a guy named Varys. He was the bald guy in the show Game of Thrones. So just imagine him if you're familiar with that show. If not, just keep in mind what I described to you a second ago. So as we're going along, they've asked Jesus this question. Now, Jesus being Jesus, doing what Jesus do, Jesus was able to discern pretty quickly the trap in this question. And we see him not answer that question the way that they wanted the question. What we see Jesus do in verse 4 through 6 is refer them back to the original, to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24 and 25, the one flesh scriptures, right? The marriage scriptures. So now I will throw in a little caveat, and this is going to be a two-part video. I'm just looking at the time. The caveat that I want to throw in here is one flesh in Genesis 2 and 24 is it when you look at the transliteration in the Hebrew, it means to announce or to announce one's wife. In Matthew 19, the transliteration of the Latin, the words that Jesus is saying transliterates to basically what most of us understand to have sex. Now, there's a spectrum between the two. There's a spectrum between Genesis 2:24 and Matthew 19 and verse, what is it? It's in here, verse 6, I believe. Yeah, verse 6. So there's a spectrum between Genesis 2:24 and Matthew 19 and verse 6. And that spectrum, just for clarity, is 2:24 is to announce one's wife, and 19 and 6 in Matthew is to have sex and have a child with one's wife, a physical one flesh. All right, so I'm gonna stop the video here, and we'll pick up from here in verse 7 and the next video.